I think my view is that companies come to Singapore not because, first and foremost, not because of tax incentives. We always take the view that the business environment as a whole and the infrastructure, it has to be welcoming to companies. And Irvin talked about this point very early on in our discussion, which is the pool of Asia, the Asia growth story. The fact that companies are seeing that their highest growth market now for their business is in Asia, how do they react to that? If more of my manufacturing operations are springing out in Asia, more of my talent pool is actually distributed in Asia, there is a need, an inherent need then for companies to think about how do I manage all this footprint, Asian footprint for my business, and how do I manage all my Asian talent, and how do I get a foothold or strengthen my foothold in Asian markets like India, China, even all the way stretching south to Australia, New Zealand, and so on, or stretching west to Middle East, and so on. So there must be inherently a business pull factor, and we are I think, fortunate enough that Singapore is strategically located in the middle of all these developments. Then think about Asia. Which other business location potentially can businesses set up where they are able to actually have oversight and management responsibilities over the entire region, what we call Pan-Asian perspective, and where that location can actually be sufficiently neutral for the companies to actually think about basing their decision makers. And then you think about Singapore and potentially, some other locations like Hong Kong or Malaysia, and then that is where I guess then we come in to say that how can we strengthen our value proposition? Because I think we have never competed based on being the most cost competitive location. Why do companies still get attracted to set up in Singapore? And the point about tax incentives is really the use of a tax incentive, we don't believe will be for really getting projects in as so much as accelerating projects and catalyzing adjacencies. So what I mean by that is basically the fact that there is a business reason. And when you're considering competing locations, how can the tax incentive come in to sweeten the deal or, offer some advantages for the companies to actually they are actually able to plow back the tax savings into accelerating their plans much faster. So, we have to look at what the context also, that the fact is today, if you look down our Economic Expansion Incentive Act and our Income Tax Act, and I think you can probably count about maybe close to 50 different types of tax incentive as it is already. Not all of these are used to the same extent, but we have the range, which is you want a tax exemption, there is a tax exemption. You want a concessionary tax rate, a reduced tax rate, or you want a reduced withholding tax rate, there is. Or you want a double deduction, there is. Various forms of incentives are already available. It's a matter of really, a lot of times what EDB does is really customizing. Because if you come to me and say your business model is such and such, and I have to see how I adapt to the use of these different tools that I have in front of me to make it the best deal, the win-win deal for both Singapore as well as for the company. So I think what we want to make sure is we have different building blocks that we can actually put together when it's needed to tailor a particular package. And I think very evidently our experience in EDB is that cookie cutter approach is out. It's like if I can offer a pioneer incentive and anchor all the projects in the world, I think we already know that Malaysia now already also offers a pioneer incentive, and obviously places like China can easily offer a tax exemption if they want to. So I think the trick is in how we adapt and how we restructure and package and tailor our efforts, and really all this underlying has to be a business decision that the company wants to locate in Singapore.
before I conclude and ask the panel for their final comments, any questions from the public? We have time for a couple, maybe. If not, then let me ask my panelists on final question and like comments from each one of them. I'd like you to comment on one aspect which you think is missing in this budget and you would have liked to see it in that. Let's start with you, Victor.
Well, the budget looks generous, $6.6 billion in budget. I think 3.2 goes to the entire business community. Within there, economic development has somewhat around 2.5 billion in attracting all the foreign direct investments here, and with around 850 million that looks at the local enterprises. While we had the budget for this year, I think without fail, we actually look at longer term that what Singapore wanted to continue to focus on. We're actually coming to an area where I mean, if you look at 10 years ago, when have we ever talked about too much foreign workers? Or when did we ever talk about full employment and not getting enough a local to join a certain workforce? So I think we've come to a certain constraint now. And with this, I think the budget itself should, I think, if you start tailoring at a few eventual trends looking forward. For instance, we know that I think there's a growing population in the whole worldwide. In Asia especially, a lot more, from Japan, China, and Singapore has been, especially within Asia Pacific itself, is one of the fastest or accelerated growing population. So do we have a budget to look at that? And then what are the incentives put in there to look at perhaps medical devices to help our growing population, or actually allow Singapore to leapfrog to compete in this area in our medical devices or biomedical cluster? Are we actually having enough of them? Maybe even test bedding, or even maybe embedding them within a certain household or certain public housing. The other second trend we see is sustainability. Looking forward, we know sustainability or green technology is something that's an inevitable trend, especially when fuel prices is high. That's something that we have to focus on. In America, we saw in the last 2 or 3 years, there have been a budget focusing on installing green solar panels down to a various form of green technologies in order to lower the consumption of fuel, utilities, and stuff like that. In here, we have not seen it. For this year, we saw something on the special purpose vehicle, on green technologies vehicle. But then again, I think unless all of you here start owning a hybrid vehicle or electric car, if not, I think that is still a limited focus at it. And I think also a third part is we are facing I think in terms of land constraint, in terms of we see ourselves expanding towards special economic zone. 10 years ago, you talk about Bintan, Batam, Karimun in Indonesia, borrowing those industrial land so that we can start siding with some of our less or maybe more laborious and also more cost-sensitive industries towards that. And for the last 2 or 3 years, you saw Iskandar being roped in to look at it too. So I think what can Singapore start focusing on? It has to be more knowledge-intensive and innovation-intensive industry. And thereon with that, all of us here, even your children and our next generation, could then start straggling in to actually be able to step out to have a higher paid income jobs. So I think all these 3 areas, the third part we've seen it coming, innovation and knowledge-intensive. But the first part on sustainability and also in terms of a procreation part, how to incentivize more having more babies, and also in terms of having more incentives for busy professionals to come in and therefore start focusing on creating all those pro-generation policies. We have not seen much of that. I think hopefully we'll see it coming in the next 2 or 3 years to come by.
Well, 2 things. One is the lower income group. The government should look at it because it's very worrying that the actual income has been decreasing over the last 10 years. So we should focus on that. And the other issue that we must look at is in respect of the growing population. A lot of my clients are very concerned with escalating healthcare. And that honestly has to do a lot with the government privatizing all the hospitals. Because to me, healthcare should be available to all citizens at a subsidized rate. To make it commercial rate, that is one of the major causes of escalating healthcare, which the government must look at.
Thank you. Gillian?
Yeah, two things from me. We talked about test bidding, we talked about R&D, innovation, and so on. I think one of the things that we in EDB are working on is this whole concept of commercialization. What does that mean? Actually, we do not know a lot about it. Basically, the fact that a very top US brand owner company will tell us that I actually do not innovate anything in-house. But what I am very good at is taking somebody's ideas and turning it into money. And really, that is a skill, that is a kind of capability that potentially I think can give a differentiating advantage to Singapore if we can develop that. And that is when, today when we look at some of our incentive schemes for R&D, we say that we want to develop or we want to attract R&D projects for R&D projects' sake because we want to create jobs for research scientists, engineers that we come out from our NUS or NTU and so on. But also the capability of commercialization. How do we turn research, the fruits of research, into something that is a Fortune 500 company? Or how do we actually take somebody's ideas? It need not be ideas from Singapore, but somebody's ideas, aggregate ideas from around the region and actually make Singapore the commercialization hub, where you turn those ideas into a manufactured product, or where you turn those ideas into something that generates royalties or licensing, and what types of incentive would encourage that sort of capability building. The other area is really, we alluded to it earlier about how do we get some of these global mid-sized companies to think about Singapore? Because we have a track record of MNCs, obviously, but these mid-sized companies are actually sometimes what we call hidden champions. They can be they can be the market number one in their particular niche areas, and we don't even know who these companies are, and they don't know who Singapore is. They don't know where Singapore is. So the reach out efforts and what kind of incentives would appeal to this kind of companies, we're still very much in a learning stage on that.
Well, I think the other panelists has pointed out several of those so-called room for improvement. For me personally, more or less in line with what they said, aging population, low birth rate, widening income gap, and for businesses, I think more can be done to help them venture overseas, because I see, that more and more of our GDP, of our economic growth will be driven, it is already largely driven by external demand, but you see more and more companies venturing overseas and then repatriating the incomes, the profits back home and driving the economic growth. But I think broadly speaking, in totality, I think what I want to highlight is that this budget has achieved something which is very much in line with our longer-term overall competitiveness of the economy. All right. Firstly, I want to emphasize that there's no such thing as a perfect budget. Okay. And I'm telling you this not just from experience as an economist, but also as an ex-government economist also. Okay, I was with the government for 5 years, and I understand every year we are basically, essentially, it's all about working around constraints and trying to come out something for everyone. All right, and that is the difficult part. But it's never perfect. All right, it will never satisfy everyone. So there are bound to be more room for improvement. But as I mentioned earlier, in the spirit of our overall competitiveness, this budget has once again reinforced our overall comparative advantage. Now, what do I mean by comparative advantage for Singapore economy? This is what I always like to tell people, is our economic agility. What has actually allowed us to overcome recessions after recessions, challenges, economic challenges after economic challenges, competitions from our regional neighbors. Time and again, we have managed to stay ahead of the race. Time and again, we have rise to the occasion, and that is because of our economic agility. We're able to adapt, we're able to change ourselves, reinvent ourselves time and again, according to the need and demand of the environment. And this budget has again reinforced that and strengthened this strength that Singapore has.
Thank you. And one final comment which I think is absolutely commendable for the government is that in most cases, once the $4 billion would have been taken out earlier by any government, they tend to get spent, and it's spent. And it's very difficult to put back $4 billion into reserves. I must congratulate the government at this time in the budget. They've actually put back $4 billion to say, this is what we've done in the past, now we're putting it back to save. I think that's fantastic, and that's really commendable for this government. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I conclude, and thank you very much, my co-panelists, for being up here, and I hand it back to the MC.
Thank you once again, Mr. Solaparka, for moderating this morning's interactive discussion, and thank you also to our distinguished panelists for the lively sharing. For spending precious time this morning to share with us their invaluable insights, we shall now invite Dr. Ernest Khan, President of ICPAS, to present tokens of appreciation to all our distinguished panelists. Dr. Khan, please. All panelists, please remain on stage after receiving your tokens to have a group photo taken. First up, we have Mr. Irvin Sia. Our second token goes to Ms. Gillian Lim. Next, we have presenter cum panelist for today's seminar, Mr. Sam E. Lung. Our fourth token goes to Mr. Victor Tay. Last but not least, we have Mr. Rohan Solarparka. We shall now proceed to have a group photo taken with Dr. Khan. Thank you once again to Dr. Khan and also to all our panelists for your support and contribution to this morning's seminar. Ladies and gentlemen, we have now come to the end of this morning's seminar. On behalf of ICPAS, we thank you for your presence and look forward to your continuous support for our upcoming events. Thank you and have a good day ahead.